I do want to again say thank you. Today is possible and accessible because of generous donations from our donors, including organizations like the Andrus Family Fund, who helped us bring organizers, including people impacted by family policing, in person here today from across the country. To that, we are most grateful. I also, as I said at the beginning, if you want to make a donation to Upend, you can visit the upendmovement.org website /donate. You will also see our merch store for those who are here. It's out there, and it's also online. You can buy T-shirts and hoodies. I have bought my merch, and I hope you buy yours too. It's not only supports the movement, they look great, and spreads the word of our collective effort. So for our last panel, we are going to be talking with people who are doing the work. They're doing the work in their communities from Houston, North Carolina, and Atlanta. And our moderator for this panel is Micah Pendleton. Micah is one of my most favorite people, not to play favorites. And she is a co-founder of the Upend movement, and she currently works as a researcher and writer for the Upend movement, focusing on how we abolish the family policing system. Micah, I know, we're here. Bring the energy, that's right. Micah's work also focuses on how we connect family policing to other movements like reproductive justice movement and how we practice abolition in real time. Last year, Micah adapted Critical Resistance's framework on abolition and reform to family policing. I hope you can go find that if you haven't seen it already. It is on the Upend website. So with that, I'm turning it over to you, Micah.
Thank you. I know that we're the last panel of the day. I know that folks are tired, but we're hoping to bring a little bit of energy today and have a great conversation about what abolition looks like in real time. So with that, I'll introduce the panel. We have Ash Williams. Ash is a Black trans abortion doula, public intellectual, and abolitionist community organizer from Fayetteville, North Carolina. For the past 5 years, Ash has been vigorously fighting to expand abortion access and funding abortions and training other people to become abortion doulas. Ash is an abortion doula with the Mountain Area Abortion Doula Collective. Welcome. Next we have Micah, is an organizer, writer, and law student. He is active in abolitionist movements against police and jail expansion and has written for publications including New York Magazine, Scalawag, MSNBC, Prism, Teen Vogue, and Race and Class. Welcome, Micah. Mellissa is a community organizer, educator, and researcher, organizing in intersectional movements against policing and surveillance and reproductive justice, environmental justice, and mutual aid in the greater Houston area and Harris County. Thank you for being here. And then finally, we have Erica, who is the founder of Progressive Fifth Ward Community Association, a civic group that operates both Fifth Ward Pocket Prairie and the Hurst Street Community Garden. She is a community and environmental activist devoted to the intersectionality of environmentalism, justice, and nature conservation in the Fifth Ward, a place she has called home since 2015. Thank you for being here today. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with these amazing panelists, some of which I've known for years, some of which I'm just meeting today, some of whom I've known of but have never met, so I'm super excited. First, I would love if each of you could talk a bit about the work you're doing and how it relates to abolitionist visions for the world. Anyone can start.
Testing? Okay. I wrote something just so I don't mince my words this afternoon. From 2020 to 2022, we have all witnessed a global pandemic that resulted in millions of deaths in the United States. Statistics later confirmed what we all suspected, and there was African Americans and Hispanics dying at higher rates from COVID because of underlying health conditions. The CDC told us this. We have the research to back it up. So I come from an issue of obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetes. Those are the main three illnesses that impact our communities. I represent Fifth Ward. Fifth Ward is a historic yet marginalized community here in the Houston area. And we are a food desert because we don't have a proper grocery store, and we're also a food swamp because we're peppered with convenience stores that are giving us nothing but a diet of high fructose corn syrup, anything that doesn't have nutritional value, and sugary drinks. So you wonder why we have all of these underlying food issues. So like-minded individuals got together and we said enough of this. So we started guerrilla gardening. We took over a vacant lot, converted it into a community garden. We build raised beds, and we grow organic food. No questions asked. If you need something, you can come there and get it. Everyone, no matter your socioeconomic status, everyone deserves the right to have good food, healthy food, especially with the diets that I'm talking about that were fed from the community businesses. So I am here to talk about how to throw a wrench in the agribusiness model because it's putting profits over people, lives are at stake, and you wonder why children are not excelling in school because they're being fed a diet of nothing but corn syrup. How do we change that? How do we change the mindsets? So I'm here to advocate for food justice. I'm here to advocate for healthy food choices for our schools and for our communities. So just happy to be at the table.
Testing. Hello. Okay. For me, it's more so just figuring out what is an opportunity to put into praxis, and praxis being like what is organizing, and the work that I do, which is, in my understanding, is like educating, providing tools back to the community, a space to experiment. And that's where I do a lot of that in my political home, being at the Houston Abolitionist Collective. So that would be doing teach-ins and political educations and centering those that are doing the existing work. And it's really great to connect and assist in a lot of existing efforts just here in Houston and across the state. And that's where I see a lot of the intersectional of praxis being done in the organizing work that we do. Whether that be looking at the history of like transportation justice here in Houston and how people are affected, whether that be reproductive justice, or analyzing surveillance contracts that's happening here in Houston and Harris County, looking at budget cycles and so forth. And that's what grounds me with other people is like, we're all coming from our own day-to-day, lives, and we're not experts of like this built, colonial late-stage capitalism that's so far ahead of these structures. And it's really, that's where I see most of our work is like just coming together and gathering and what we know about each other, learning from each other, and putting that into the motion of what can we create together, learning these things. Yeah.
Well, hi, everyone. Ooh, loud. It's great to be here and great to be the closing session of the day. So I have been lucky to be part of the movement over the last couple of years to stop Cop City in Atlanta. Can you raise your hand if you've heard of Cop City? Oh my goodness, everyone's plugged in. Okay, well, if you haven't, Cop City is this proposal by the city of Atlanta and by this private nonprofit police foundation called the Atlanta Police Foundation in Atlanta that sort of popped up after the 2020 uprisings, in a lot of ways in response to the 2020 uprisings, but also, the roots of the plan were before that. The plan was basically to take almost 400 acres of forest land in southeast Atlanta, in a majority black area, working class area of Atlanta, tear down that land and replace it with what they first said was a $90 million police training facility. It's become many more millions than that at this point. in part funded by this private foundation with all of this corporate money behind it, in part funded by the city. We call it Cop City because it literally includes plans for a mock city within it, so this sort of pretend city where they can practice in various urban warfare and control tactics. And it's really, an issue that brings together so many different issues. Obviously, environmental devastation. Atlanta, like so many other places, had record heat this summer, and the city is trying to take away tree canopy. That's really critical. It's an issue of gentrification. Since the 1990s, Atlanta went from, I believe, 68% black to now 48% black as black communities have been pushed out of the city as developers have, grabbed up land and turned it into luxury apartments. And that's part of what the plan is of what they're doing here. And so, it's bringing together so many different issues. And what's really amazing is that, Atlantans have been fighting now for years amidst really intense repression to stop the creation of Cop City. And it's a battle that's actively ongoing. And, we'll talk more about it, I think, in the coming questions. But yeah, and I think in terms of how it relates to abolitionist values, it's a fight for safety. It's, I think abolition is about how do we create safety? How do we create wellness for people? How do we give people the resources they need? One of the ways not to do that is by investing $90 to $120 million in a deadly police playground. One of the ways that we can do that is by preserving green spaces and by investing in housing and by investing in people and schools and parks and roads. And so, I think it's very fundamentally an abolitionist struggle for the city that, the people of Atlanta deserve.
Hi everyone, my name's Ash and I use he and him pronouns and I'm repping the Mountain Area Abortion Doula Collective. So we're an abortion doula collective based in Western North Carolina. We provide free and non-judgmental and gender-affirming care before, during, and after abortion. We also fund abortion, and that's a big part of what we do because the cost of an abortion can be a huge barrier to accessing care. And then we also, in terms of funding abortion, we don't believe that people should have to decide between if they're gonna pay for their light bill or be able to afford necessary health care. And so we try to plug in with the surrounding things that someone might have going on. And then lastly, we train other people to become abortion doulas because we realize that what's missing in our communities is access to information. And so we wanna make sure that people know how to access abortion on their own, both through and not through the medical industrial complex. And we believe that that power and that knowledge, it's important that it remains in the hands of the people. And I think we believe that we are in alignment with abolition because as doulas, we are not mandatory reporters. We do not call the police. We also are creating alternatives to policing in prisons by making sure that people know about self-managing abortions. We believe that community care is an alternative to police and prisons. And so we're really trying to do that for all people who might be having abortions.
Okay, thank you. That's all incredible. So much incredible work going on. Thank you for sharing. So, all of you are doing such different work in a way. We're talking about farming and community gardening. We're talking about police and prison abolition. And we're also talking about abortions and being an abortion doula and doing that education. Can you talk a little bit about how all of this work intersects with each other and is actually related to each other, even though it doesn't seem like it? This work is in conversation with each other, but sometimes people struggle to make those connections. And I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about how they are connected, but also talk a little bit about why it's important to think of this work as connected to each other.
One of the things that I think might connect our organizing or our struggles is the issue of criminalization. And as I learn more and more about pregnancy criminalization, which is the cause of abortion criminalization, right? I am clear about the ways that we need to work cross movements to figure these things out. I'm also thinking about that third principle of reproductive justice, which posits that All people deserve to live free from harm from another motherfucker, from the state, from the government, from the environment. And we deserve the necessary social supports and resources to be able to make decisions for our families. And I can hear each and every one of us talking about like that very aspect of reproductive justice as we lift up what we're here for today.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, I mean, who shows up to the climate protests? The police. Who shows up, when abortion is criminalized? The police. Who shows up when people are trying to stop deportations? The police, right? The police and criminalization are at the center of all of these struggles, because any struggle that's meaningfully challenging the status quo is going to have to go through policing. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of ways, with the Stop Cop City movement, where it's an environmental justice struggle, it's an anti-gentrification struggle, it's a human rights struggle, and it's the police who are at the center of all of that. And in terms of connections, I mean, we have to be willing to, excavate and make clear what the connections are, but like, the oppressors are the ones who have made the connections. They're all connected, right? Yeah. Georgia has a law enforcement exchange program with countries like Israel, where the Israeli military forces trains Georgia police forces and Atlanta police. In Israel, there's a training facility that they colloquially refer to as Little Gaza, where they train in the same sorts of tactics, that they want to train in Cop City. And so I think, we have to be willing to make these connections all the time between, the way that I do think that criminalization is at the center of so much that upholds all of this injustice, because at the end of the day, I think police are the ones who show up to enforce the status quo. And, just from this conversation alone today, we know what the status quo is.
Yeah, same. Just looking at Houston, again, like the state has so much resources and just exploitation, divesting from people, and I think that's also where we see the connections at, such as when it comes to transportation equity here in Houston, of what projects should be invested on, of expansion of highways, divesting from housing here, like the I-45 project, say when it comes to our houseless members and organizers being criminalized to assist on, again, a lack of resources when it comes to reproductive justice and lack of, whether that be transportation, lodging, and all needs met to be comfortable of any repro health seeking for, lack of resources, and same with climate here in Houston, like, again, our disaster recovery needing equitable flooding mitigation. And so we see all these connections of overlaps in different fields of crises. And I think that's where we see this radical nature threshold of like that we need to meet each other across these spaces that we all organize in different issues. And that's where we find a liberatory practice to be explored at. And I always come back to those resources, and same with what about Georgia and Israel occupation of military is the same thing here with Houston, and even the universities having a huge role on that, and especially seeing Houston being #1 diverse in the whole country. We do have a huge population of Palestinian neighbors, and that's also where we see across intersection of our struggleship with each other across our neighborhoods and communities, and that's where I see that. It's a lot, but it makes me happy to be here and just hearing all this, and just a huge reminder that we are in this struggleship together.
Absolutely, absolutely. One thing about Houston and diversity is we are diverse. They're always talking about how diverse we are, but there is a socioeconomic segregation that will continue to prevail in this city. I've seen it. I'm a native, so I can say that I've seen it. I've lived outside of Houston, so I can see it from a different perspective. So we've got to make sure that when we talk about diversity, it's more than just ethnicity and nationality. It's about other things, and we've not gotten to that point yet. But in terms of the criminalization, where you were talking about that's going on in Atlanta, the same exact thing is going on in Fifth Ward. right? So we don't have a proper grocery store. I mentioned that earlier. How many of you have even driven through Fifth Ward or know where it is? Okay, not many, but we're northeast of downtown. We have a multi-million-dollar golf course. We have 2 pickleball courts, but we don't have a proper grocery store. So investing in things that make sense and not letting capitalism just go unchecked, that's been our problem for sure. And talking about connecting all of these things to the strands you all have talked about, food justice, right? No matter where you are in life, you've got to have access to healthy foods. And if the problem is with our FDA and USDA, right? They are only given subsidies for three things: corn, wheat, and soybean. So that means the incentive is to create things by those 3 commodities, right? You get incentivized, you get subsidies from the government if you grow those 3 things. So we've got to get away from a monoculture farming. We can't just keep growing the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results. So there needs to be a wrench thrown in all of these systems because they're all connected. They're all connected. Children's health, women's rights, environmental issues, gentrification. There could be a whole conference talking about gentrification happening in Houston right now, just from what I see. But I digress. I know you have other questions to get to, but that's my comment.
Yes, thank you all. And Mellissa, I want to draw on something you said. You called this and these issues a field of crises. And I think that's such a useful way to think about family policing at the same time that policing and reproductive justice oppression is happening, and the same time that food injustice is happening, as these fields of crises sort of collapsing with each other. Because we know that when families don't have access to the care that they need, whether that is reproductive care or that's the care to care for their children, when police are going to people's doors and removing their children from their home, and when people don't have the food that they need and that is bringing them to the attention of the system, these are fields of crises that are intersecting, they're overlapping, and they're really pushing people into the family policing system. So I thank you for that, and I think that's such useful language to think about these issues as colliding with each other. I want to talk a little bit about tactics, right? So this panel is about practicing abolition. What does abolition look like in real life? What type of tactics do you use as a part of your organizing strategy? And also, how do you deal with tensions that arise between different sort of tactics, whether that's within yourself or with other organizers that you're working with? I think so often it's like we've talked about today. We have legislative efforts. We have people who are doing more direct service and organizing. And I think it's always useful to have this conversation about how do we combine tactics, how do we deal with tensions to move the work forward.
I can share some tactics that are dear to me or some ways of life. When you ask this question, Maya, the first thing that comes to my mind is direct action. And we ask, is it a tactic or a strategy? But for some of us, it is a way of life. I also think that there's ways to use it as a tactic strategically in our organizing. But it is something that is important to me in terms of how we choose to, or when and if we choose to put our bodies, our minds, our hearts, and our ideas on the line for what we believe in. I just think that's central to my organizing. And then political education, much like Mellissa, that is another area where I feel particularly compelled to support the organizing collectives that I'm a part of, whether that be finding creative ways to bring information to folks or just having more ways for us to have these participatory kind of public education moments in the community. And then as it relates to the difference of tactics, I definitely realize that there's a lot of different things that might be necessary. And I feel, or I want everyone to be in whatever their lane is, wherever they feel comfortable. And I feel like I found my place. And so I have so much respect for the people that use other tactics than me. I'll pause there.
Yeah, I love that this panel is called Start Where You Are, because I feel like that encapsulates so much of the Stop Cop City movement. So just like big overview, the movement is really decentralized, so it's not one organization, you know, that is calling the shots or deciding what the strategy is going to look like. It is really hundreds, thousands of Atlanta residents and supporters from across the country and the world who have moved in solidarity in a lot of different ways. And the way I think about the tactics is that it's throw everything at the wall and see what sticks and try everything and fight on literally every front that we can. And so you have people who have done, you know, the really traditional, like, we're going to get 400 people and go down to City Hall, and we're going to make our city council members sit there all day long as we give them 15 hours of public comment saying stop Cop City, and then they're going to ignore us because they're all, you know, bought off. But it still matters that we register that dissent, and it still matters that we show up again and again. And so we have those sort of like more traditional, you know, tactics. You also have people engaged in direct action and really radical militant direct action. So after sort of the first phase of the campaign, when despite all of this community outcry, the city council said, yeah, we're building it anyway, what people in the community said is, no, you're not. This doesn't end on your terms. Just because you pass legislation saying, yeah, you can build it, you still have to find contractors to build it. You still have to find all of the funding to build it. And people went in that moment in sort of fall 2021, and they put their bodies on the line, and they occupied the forest, and they built encampments, and they defended it. And people, you know, have faced enormous repression for defending it. So 42 people have been charged with domestic terrorism in Georgia. These are cases that are ongoing. The state just brought RICO charges, racketeering charges, against the movement. Yeah, it's wild. I'm getting loud because it's wild. And you know, I think it's, you know, the state has used these tactics before, and they're ramping them up and they're testing it out in Atlanta. The state literally murdered a beloved comrade named Tortuguita, a queer indigenous comrade who had been putting their body on the line in the forest, and the police walked in and murdered them, and then blamed Tortuguita for their own murder, as they always do when they kill. And so it's a lot of different tactics. You know, right now there's a referendum effort to put Cop City on the ballot. This campaign gathered over 110,000 signatures from Atlanta residents this summer to put it on the ballot. And so I'm talking for too long now, but just saying there are so many different tactics. We need them all. People have been canvassing from the beginning. And so, you know, think about start where you are. Start in your neighborhood and go out and talk to your neighbors and, you know, tell them about whatever the issue is and start to build that base and build support. You know, yeah, I think the start where you are is something to really take to heart, because we do all have a lane, and we need to find it, and we need to move in it.
Yeah, just to go off what Micah was talking about, like, police lie. They are liars. They are exploiters, extractivists, like everything they take. And I think that's where tactics come in, is that we acknowledge, like, having a discipline of whatever space that we enter, and that we're making sure, and this was discussed at a previous panel also, like about calling in and calling out, and I think that's a huge tactic to first start off with yourself first, as you hold yourself accountable, because that's part of practicing safety, and that's part of the abolitionist practice of the spaces that we enter in, such as acknowledging tactics of acknowledging who's in the room, who's giving these tactics. Are we making sure that we are not replicating these tactics that the state and capitalism and all these accelerated machines have been using on us, and making sure that we are actively disciplined in praxis of making sure that we're not doing that to each other, and that starts in the interpersonal spaces. And I think that's an important tactic to really not overlook, because I think it could be so easy in the movement where people can easily agree to things and have, you know, a simple understanding of just infographics, or just very easy, like, face values things. And I think that's where it gets into the nitty gritty of, like, where do I start now that I know these things? Where can I put this into action? And I think that's where it starts, having that conversations with your close friends in your interpersonal, like, who are your people, and figuring out, is this thing existing outside in my community? If there is, let me plug into that. And if there's not, if there's a need to be called, then it's like, let's experiment and get down to it, and which is the direct action. And I think the political education goes in the interpersonal and the action as well, and that can be publicly in whatever space of a need for safety.
Everything you all have said, but also just to be mindful of intergenerational communities. I live in a very intergenerational community, and everybody gets their information very differently, and the available time that they have to commit to these topics and these concerns of ours, they all vary. So I'm a real big fan of public comments because I believe that if it's documented, then it's discoverable later when discovery part of the lawsuit occurs. So just go old school backyard social studies. Start with the council member, start with figure out what, especially here in Houston, what committee do they chair, go to those meetings, go to public comments on Tuesdays, then figure out what state regulatory is over that particular issue. With us in Fifth Ward, it's always TCEQ, Texas Environmental Commission, supposedly protecting our environment, but they're doing everything but that. So talking to individuals and just wrapping their brain around, when I say a public comment, what does that mean? And we really do have like a little template to help you put your thoughts together to get those public comments documented so that they come up later when we sue their asses. So that's my thought on that.
Thank you.
If I may, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's something that you mentioned that really brought up, like, yeah, it is so important to document, and that is a liberatory principle, is like putting that into practice, that we need to reshare and put it down our memories, because that is the very thing that they're trying to erase and take over our narratives, and that we are the experts of our own lived experience. And I've seen that a lot across, struggleship in spaces in Houston and all the topics that was discussed. And I think that is a huge tactic. I didn't want to forget that, but just to put it record keeping, our archivists, our librarians, everything that has to do with history, because that's how we map things out and figure out what can we do in this times now from historical organizing skills and tactics.
Yeah, thank you, Erica and Mellissa, for that. I think, when it comes to family policing, we know that social workers document everything against families and parents, right? And so thinking about what it means to document our ideas, our struggles, our history, our pains, our oppression in service of liberation, and instead of being in service of systems. And I think, so often research is based around numbers and all this quantifiable stuff, but if you go up to people and ask them what their experiences are, they're able to tell you what it's like to be under watch of a child welfare system or the family policing system. They're able to tell you what it's like to have supervised visits with their children. So I love this idea of documenting these things, documenting our struggles in service of liberation. And did you have something you wanted to say?
Just a really quick, immediate example of that is that before the Cop City struggle, comrades in Chicago were fighting against Cop Academy, which was this really similar plan. And ultimately, a version of that is going forward, but they documented so much of their struggle in a way that was so critical to folks in the Stop Cop City movement in terms of designing the campaign and how to approach it, how to even, think about what are we going to call it, Cop City. And so just, a +1 to always documenting, because I think it always is useful for later iterations of the struggle.
Yeah, it's also bringing me back to our earlier conversation from Sydney and Kanis about, the power of language and renaming things and calling things what they are. And, Stop Cop City is such a good example of there's another name for that, right? The state's name, but you all turned it into what it is, and it makes it so accessible for people to understand what exactly is going on. So a large part of the work of abolition, especially in the family policing space, is redefining or recreating safety, care, and community outside of carceral systems. How do safety, care, and community show up in your work, and how do you practice it in your work?
So safety, care, and community shows up often in our work because we don't have a gate on the community garden. So that means that you're free to access it. We have opportunities to come in and reconnect with those skills that went dormant in our fingertips. Our ancestors innately knew when to grow things, when to do things. There was no calendar, there was no guide. And I think when you put your hands in the soil, when you put your bare foot into the ground, you ground yourself, that is reactivated, that creates energy. So we provide those opportunities by intentionally having work days and grounding days and seed swap days and those types of things so that people in the community, first of all, can feel safe. We're all there for the same purpose and feel nurtured. They feel nurtured when they come because they're able to be in fellowship with someone else that you don't have to know how to grow. Oftentimes people don't want to do it because they just assume that the plant is going to die or something's not going to grow. You don't know these things until you try. And then when you're around a community of people that are doing that, it rubs off. So we try to create safe spaces like that for the community.
For me, it would be just noting, again, back to tactics like the relational organizing. How do we relate to one another, and also building relationships with each other, whether that be amongst comrades or just the people in your pods. And or by pods, I mean like your close loved ones, the people that you've cultivated around you, and whether that just be a check-in or making sure that you have your needs met, and having spaces of care where that can look like anything where it feels like you have agency and autonomy to reach out for. And yeah.
Yeah, I think so many opportunities to practice care and to practice sort of creating the conditions and the systems that we want, throughout the Stop Cop City movement. We've seen that in so many ways. Regular food distributions, free clothing closets, people always, having huge potlucks, making sure that, and of course, no one can meet everybody's needs in the way that we need people's needs met, but really incorporating mutual aid and community care as sort of an integral, regular, ongoing part of the work, I think is so important, including, when we have huge public comment days, comrades focusing on, we're gonna make sure that everyone has masks because, same as in the space like this where masks are required, which is so important, making sure that in these times when we're all coming together, that we can keep each other safe. And then, I think even in sometimes interactions with the cops. I think about a moment at the end of June. It was during a week of action. A ton of people had come in from all over at the invitation of Atlanta organizers. And we were in this public park where we had been gathering. We were going to be for the week. And suddenly, 30 cops, with all of their guns, the stormtroopers, come walking up. And I was terrified. And I was like, I don't know what we're going to do. What's going to happen? What are they going to do? And I remember multiple people. One was like, everyone phones out. And another was like, everyone stay together. And they marched through the park saying, we're going to tell everyone you need to be out by 11. And instead of it being like them intimidating us, we ended up escorting them through the park, and we had our phones on them the whole time, and we were chanting at them the whole time. We walked them right out of the park. It was not the operation that they had envisioned. And so I think even in that moment, we could practice care for each other by banding together and by recognizing that they can roll up with 30 stormtroopers, but there's hundreds of us there. And, we're going to be the ones who escort them through the park as opposed to them, scaring everybody.
Yes. When I think of safety, I think about not doing anything to incriminate myself or the people that I work with, and also sharing information about what is actually criminalizable as it relates to abortion and supporting people who are having abortions. And I also, I think that care and community is at the core of everything that we try to do. we're really trying to provide another example of what community care and healthcare can look like. And we're also trying to reify people who have abortions as knowers of our own experience in some ways too. I am thinking about like some of the work that we have kind of coming in the future as we continue to fight criminalization. It is really grounding for me that no matter how the laws change or what the policies say, that people will still need to find ways to have abortions. And I want to be able to give people information about how to do that safely and also increase access. As a doula, I believe that all my job is to increase the choices for pregnant people and to increase the choices that I wouldn't choose for myself. Also thinking here about safety, I've heard this word be used to marginalize abortion, right? Some people say that abortion should be safe and legal. Well, what happens if the state makes having abortions unsafe, right? Gestational abortion bans make abortion unsafe. The police make abortion unsafe. Anti-abortion protesters at abortion clinics make abortion unsafe. Abortion is not inherently unsafe. And so I'm holding all of those things at the core as I'm thinking about the care and community work that we're doing as doulas.
Yeah, thank you so much. Ash, one thing that you mentioned, which I imagine is another way to keep people safe, is not, doing mandatory reporting.
Yeah.
That's an issue that comes up so often in child welfare, and also, with people that might be teachers or doctors or social workers who are interested, in this work in abolition but feel compelled to report. What does it mean to you to not do mandatory reporting? Sorry to put you on the
Yeah,
spot.
no, it's no problem. I am not going to do the police's job for them. So when I am saying I refuse to do mandatory reporting, I refuse to help them criminalize people. And I also realize the power of that refusal. I have to give a shout out to Interrupting Criminalization. I feel like I'm gonna miss another. The 13 principles for interrupting criminalization in healthcare. Interrupting crim is, people smarter than me are really doing a lot, and they have a lot to say about mandatory reporting and ways that people whose job it is to be the police like that, ways that they can resist, ways that y'all can resist mandatory reporting. And so I encourage people to check out those resources, but also as a support person and as a carer, I just have to continue to be mindful about both the power that I hold in terms of I've got access maybe to information or things that other people don't. And I don't want to facilitate their death or facilitate any harm. And so I'm thinking about not working with law enforcement and systems of oppression in that way. And when I hold those things true, I'm able to support people better, I think, and more mindfully.
Thank you for that. I think not facilitating harm is so useful, especially as it relates to social work and family policing and reporting and all that. I do want to leave some time for questions. I know we're almost at time, but I wanted to ask, I know that people often wonder, how do I start something like a community garden, or how do I have all these ideas in my head, but how do I make something that's useful for my community that keeps people out of systems like the family policing system? So I'm wondering if y'all could talk a little bit about, getting started. What does that look like? How do you get started with something, even if you're not directly tied to organizing, even if you're not, doing the work now, you have an idea, what do you do?
I would just offer to find the other people. Find the other people who are like you, that are caring about the same things that you care about, and perhaps y'all can create something together, or find other people that are like y'all. And I think that would be a great start.
I would say that as well. Find an organization and start volunteering with that organization. Follow them on their social media channels and see what kind of activities or opportunities that they present, and attend, and just start being in community and conversation with them. And then from there, I mean, if the interest is still there, because sometimes, you know, we're concerned, but then we measure our concern. But if you're, after you measure and you're still, you know, gung-ho about it, for sure, get together with someone as like-minded and start your community garden. There are so many vacant lots all over Houston. If anybody wants to start a community garden, come talk to me on the side. I can tell you how to get that started in Houston.
I would say I'm so thankful for the digital age that we're in, because like that keeps us so connected online. So if anything, just Google it using DuckDuckGo. For those that don't know, DuckDuckGo, like it's this anti-surveillance secure search. But yeah, you can just search what interests you, and again, like your morals, if you are led to want to be connected to communities that are like you, your morals will not stray from you. And you know, fishing out what is meaningful, how to create meaningful change with others. And I think that's a great starting point, is just searching what is a care that you're seeking for? What is something that you find missing? Because that goes back to abolitionist, you know, being a praxis. It's like, what is this despair that I'm feeling, or what's missing, and what can I do to create it? And then in that search, it's like, is this in existence? How can I support it? And if it's not, then that's time for you to, you know, roll up your sleeves and get dirty to experiment. And I think that's a beautiful process in exploring how to get started.
I would second everything that's been said. And then I just want to share a reflection from a friend of mine. This is not my own thinking, but something that we've been talking about lately is how I think sometimes in like the Twitter era or whatever, it's easy to like see people online who are like doing amazing work and think like, oh, well, that's like, those are like the activists, like those are the people who change things and do things. And something that this friend has been talking about is like, no, like the goal of canvassing, the goal of being out in the streets is like to help everybody see themselves as the person who is gonna, you know, shift their own conditions and make the change. And that sounds so cliche, but like get together and organize with people. And like there isn't like an activist class. There isn't like a group of people who are more qualified to be doing, you know, the things that we're all, you know, and of course there are amazing people that we all learn from who are like, we'll always respect so much, but I think our work as organizers should always be to be, you know, helping other people see themselves as political agents who are the ones who then can organize other people. And so that's, you know, not any sort of concrete thing, but I think just, yeah, I think a really valuable reflection that I've been sitting with from my friend.
Thank you so much. I will pause there to see if there are any questions from this audience, but also our virtual audience. Hello, online. I think if there's questions, we'll just put the mic in the middle and let folks step up. Does anyone want to vote? Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for this conversation. It's very inspiring and grounding. I'm wondering, because we talked about hope earlier as a really important practice in abolition work, and so what does that practice look like for all of you?
I can say something. I feel like, I don't know how hopeful this is actually going to sound, but something that I've been carrying with me is something that Kelly Hayes says a lot, which is that if we don't fight, we know we're going to lose. But if we fight, we at least have a chance of winning. And, you know, we don't know that we're going to win, but we at least have a chance. But if we don't fight, we know we're going to lose. And so that maybe feels a little unhopeful, but to me it actually is like a reason to keep going, because let's give ourselves a fighting chance, because that's all we can do at the end of the day. And so that feels hopeful to me.
Not having hope is not an option, right? So if I wake up and just everything around me thinking about these topics, and it just makes me depressed, and I can't move, I can't do anything, I'm not taking care of myself, nor am I being good to anybody else around me. So I think that's the baseline. You got to have hope. I believe if you have faith, you have hope. So those two things go together. And these things, what's the scripture? I'm not trying to quote scripture, but there is a scripture that says, "This too shall pass." My mom says it all the time. I really believe that this too shall pass. So it'll get better.
Like you were just saying about hope being the baseline, I'm thinking about a question that I get asked, like, how do I keep going with all the tumultuousness of the landscape and the criminalization? And I often respond by saying, I keep going because there's someone who continues to call my trap phone to get to help, looking for help for an abortion. And so, I mean, people who are having abortions are keeping me going. People's need for health care is what keeps me going. And so as long as there is that, like, I will be organizing.
For me, what I think keeps hope alive is just the simple gathering of people for meeting and wanting to seek safety. And I think that reminds me that, like, hope is safety. And whether, like, for example, here in Houston, going through so much, like, I was born and raised here also, and going through so much climate disasters, and it's in those moments of, like, instability of housing and gender stuff, and just so much under layers of these intersections of struggleship that where it just all feels so overwhelming, and just knowing that we are all in this struggle together keeps my hope alive, and that what makes me want to come back to organizing, despite feeling alone sometimes in our own personal experiences, but knowing that there are relations and connections that keeps my hope into a really firm discipline to keep going. Yeah.
Thank you. That makes me hopeful, if anything. Next question.
Hi. Something that was talked about in the previous panel was the dangers of the charismatic leader and how a lot of times, like, organizations could be entirely reliant on that person and that person leaves. And I think within this room, I'm sure it's filled with the people who are like, I have this idea, I'm gonna do it. But then I'm finding, like, within almost all the organizations I'm in, it's falling onto 2 to 3 people to do all the work, and everyone else is like, yeah, I can support, and then capacity falls, people feel burdened, and I'm wondering, once you're there, how can you pivot your organization? How could you pivot to make it so that maybe those who are new, who don't feel as confident in themselves, and those at the top can kind of divvy up the work that's being done in a way that allows for trust? Because I think a lot of us here might be like, if I don't do it, it's not going to be done right. And sometimes that's correct, but how do we divvy it up like that, I guess, is my question.
So, to your question, how do you pivot? I just want to make sure I understand what you're asking. If you have an organization and you want to bring new people in, and you don't want, I guess, 80% of the work being done by 20% of the people, how do you pass this along? That's my struggle. I don't know about y'all on this panel, but I just watered my garden this morning because the person that was supposed to water today couldn't make it. I mean, I just think that's a part of nonprofit organizing, grassroots efforts. I bring people in and I show them this is what we do, this is what we need for you to do, what can you do? They'll agree to do, and sometimes they show up, sometimes they don't. I just think it goes with the nature of the work. I personally believe I might be giving too much information. Maybe I just need to step back and let's see what they do. I find myself being quasi-type A a little, and so maybe, and it's a learning lesson for me. It's a constant lesson for me. How do you get volunteers to stay? They'll come to the meetings, but how do you get them to come back? And some of them do, some of them don't. I don't know a good percentage. I don't know enough about that to say what strategies work best. I can just tell you from my perspective, you win some and you lose some, and it balances out. And sometimes you are left watering the garden, but the work will get done. Do y'all have a better answer?
I'll just quickly say, as someone that goes through that, I think that goes back again to the tactics, relational organizing, continuing on building relationships with other people and stepping out of your comfort zone to talk to other people that you don't normally, so that way it challenges this pattern of like fraternalization or like cliquing or whatever. And that way we're making sure that we're keeping in check of the environment that we're all collectively coming into. And creating, structures of care for organizers that do a lot, and making sure that we're also, again, enforcing this trust with each other, that we can tell each other that, hey, I need a break or I need care, and that way others can go in. But again, that goes back to, creating systems of sustainable, because at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is liberation. And that comes with community care, that comes with making things sustainable so that anyone can come on board and want to take things on, and creating safety nets of agency and making things autonomous where new people or even existing people can come back to want to explore things around them.
Okay, next question. Thank you all, and thank you for the question.
Hi, beautiful people. Thank you to the panelists so I feel like all of y'all did come from so many different practices and works that y'all are doing. So I guess since you're in such many different spaces, but also very similar, I wanted to ask, what are some unique liberatory practices that you've kind of learned from the work that you specifically do? Thanks.
I'm thinking about how we do reproductive justice. I'm thinking about centering intersecting oppressions in order for all people to live self-determined lives. That's like a thing that a big takeaway that I get from RJ. And another kind of major takeaway that I would say that RJ offers is this idea that we have to work across movements to end oppression. That feels really significant and really big, especially with that third principle that we've already talked about. I think that has a lot of connective tissue across movements.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, I'll say, this is certainly not unique to the Stop Cop City movement, but I feel like it's where I've seen it again and again and again. It's just the power of solidarity. And I'll just tell a quick story, which is that, so on this really horrible day, March 5th, 2023, the cops descended on this music festival that hundreds of people were at in the Weelaunee Forest, which is, what folks are fighting to defend right now. They arrested 23 people, charged them with domestic terrorism, horrible. And as this was happening, as this raid on the forest was happening, there were still a bunch more people there, who are at threat of arrest. And the people who have been arrested continue to fight those charges, and it's had horrible, impacts that people are still fighting. But the rest of those people who were together, instead of, panicking and fleeing, what some folks were able to do with the folks who had not already been picked up is they said, hey, y'all, link arms, stay together. They linked arms, they chanted, let us go. They said, we're not leaving if we can't all leave together. And eventually they were allowed to leave. And so I think that, I've just seen again and again the power of solidarity, the power of not leaving each other behind. The folks who have been arrested, there's all this infrastructure that exists in order to, help defend them. And you can donate to the Atlanta Solidarity Fund, which is sort of at the forefront of this, if not. And so, yeah, that's just a lesson that, this movement continues to drive home for me.
I know we're almost at time, but we have one more question I'd like to get to, so yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so there was a lot of mention about 2020 being a just a wake-up call for a lot of people. I also think that this moment where Palestinians are facing genocide is showing the limitations of the conversations that were had in 2020. I was telling my friend Mellissa that it's showing who was talking about maybe representation and diversifying colonial systems versus who was talking about the police state and abolishing the police. And so in this moment, while this is happening, and I know that a lot of people, I don't blame them, we live in colonial systems, universities are colonial systems. What would you offer to people in this room to make the connections of why they should also, when they're talking about policing, that also means confronting the settler colonial state and why that issue matters to people here in the US, in Texas, in Houston?
We say that reproductive justice will be achieved when all people have the necessary things that they need to make decisions for themselves and their families in all areas of their lives. And for me, that means that like reproductive justice can't be achieved unless Cop City is stopped and unless the community gardens are funded and resourced, and unless the mutual aid organizations that exist have the things that they need to get their work done. And it also means like there has to be an end to settler colonial violence. I think that the movement for reproductive justice makes a lot of space for that. And I also think that we're at a point now where we gotta have some real conversations about human rights, specifically as a framework. And rights frameworks in general about how they might be limiting in terms of what we actually need for our communities. And so I think this might be an opportunity for that to happen, for us to have a larger conversation about settler colonialism and reproductive justice.
As it relates to food justice, I think that we have to have different policies. We have to have, like I mentioned earlier, the FDA that's supposed to be responsible for protecting our food, the USDA, all of these people that are in the federal government, and their responsibility is making sure that we have access to safe food. It just needs to be blown up because it's not working. It used to work, but it doesn't work anymore. We need to become not as reliant on them. We have to began thinking about neighborhoods and communities as being self-sufficient little cities, if you will, that's creating and generating their own food, their own energy. That some people may say that's a very utopia way of thinking about it, but I now, and let's be real, I don't grow all of my food. But there are two things that I don't go to the grocery store for that I can get out of my backyard. And if we just take small steps like that, just small steps, not think, oh, I need to have 10 acres of land and I got to do this. Just small steps to get off of their system, because their system, like I mentioned earlier, the 3 subsidies, soybeans, wheat, and corn, it is designed to kill us. It is designed to kill us. Or that might be too strong. It is designed to keep us sick with underlying health conditions. So we've got to figure out how to separate from all of these federal systems for food security and come up with our own community food security systems to help sustain ourselves and our families. Because if the child is eating poor food and they're now having underlying health conditions at the age of 10, 12, what is their trajectory? What will happen to them as they become an adult? So we have to start thinking about this now.
I would say the cross-struggleship is what I think ultimately brings us towards abolition of like just the rage by state violence and, what's going on across our coasts and what's going across our seas of this struggle with what's going on in Palestine. And again, it goes back to Houston, it's very, the city loves to use, pretty stats of diversity and, make us into superficial stats and data when really we are people, and in our differences, we have unique needs that must be met. And I think it's understanding our differences and reaching towards what is meant to be needed is that space to experiment and know that we really do have each other to rely on, such as the RICO indictment charges towards mutual aid and reproductive justice. And that's something that at HAC, we've assisted in mutual aid, whether that be on jail support or any, our own pockets, our own courage from our rage is all that we have and that we can rely on outside of existing policy changes, state, government official titles and desk offices. And even, I think that's just a grounding reminder that liberation will always be the ultimate goal. And in order to reach that, it's what are we doing with each other to rely on knowing our needs to rely on each other, and what can we build together? Because again, that goes back to the scary aspect of abolition, is we're tearing down these existing, pillars on imperialistic grounds, and just what can we build? And I think that's where, I think that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think I would just, say that, and seeing the interconnectedness of all these struggles here, and of the same, government and policymakers that are supporting harm elsewhere cannot also support good things happening to our communities and our families here. So even if it doesn't seem like things are, connected, or you're like, what does this have to do with me? I think when we're looking at, our government as our governing body and the people who are making decisions about our families and where we live, if we see the harm that they can do in other places, we know that they can also do harm here. With that, I would like to thank all of our panelists today. Thank you so much. It's been amazing to be in conversation with all of you. And also thank you for your questions and your participation. Yeah, thank you.